good evening, good afternoon, good morning, in the various time zones. I'm Zev Yaroslavsky, and I welcome you on behalf of the members of our leadership team at America at a Crossroads, which aside from me, consists of former Congressman Mel Levine and Janice Kaminer-Resnick, who is traveling this evening. We thank tonight's special guests, political pollsters Celinda Lake and Paul Maslin, and welcome them back to America at a Crossroads. Thanks as well to our wonderful moderator, Warren Olney. Of course, during this presidential election year, the topic of political polling is especially relevant, with all of us wanting to know about their validity, reliability, and their impact on the elections. We have the perfect team tonight to address those questions. But before I get to them, let me just give you a couple of advanced notices about our programming. Next Wednesday, May 15th, we will welcome the former governor of Arizona and former secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, who will be in conversation with Pat Morrison to discuss how safe are we, a frank assessment about the condition of the security of the homeland. More coming attractions. In the coming weeks, we have a great lineup of speakers. May 22nd, we look forward to an hour with former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neil Katyal to update us on all things related to the Trump lawsuits. The following week, we will present journalist and author Jacob Heilbrunn to discuss the right on the political spectrum, the right's century-long romance with foreign dictators, to be followed in early June with UC Berkeley School of Law Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, who will talk about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism on college campuses. So save Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Pacific time all year for America at a Crossroads. We hope we won't disappoint. Now to introduce tonight's guests. Celinda Lake is a pollster and a Democratic political strategist. She was one of two lead pollsters for the Biden for President campaign in 2020. She currently serves as a pollster for the Democratic National Committee. Her firm, Lake Research Partners, is known for cutting-edge research on issues including the economy, healthcare, the environment, and education. Celinda is one of the nation's foremost experts on electing women candidates and on framing issues to women voters. Paul Maslin is also a nationally recognized pollster who has worked for presidential, senatorial, congressional, and local candidates across the country. I've been privileged to work with him on the surveys I've conducted over the last decade at UCLA. He is a pollster's pollster and a true professional, and a very keen sense of what's going on, and with a good finger on the pulse of the American voter. Our moderator tonight is a regular with us, Warren Olney, who was the host and executive producer of the nationally syndicated public radio international weekday afternoon program, To the Point. He is the only two-time winner of the Los Angeles Society of Professional Journalists Distinguished Journalist Award and recipient of the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award conferred by his peers at the Radio and Television News Association of Southern California. And a piece of trivia, his grandfather, Warren Olney Jr., was a justice of the California Supreme Court. We wanted to bring something new into the introduction to you, Warren. So, Warren, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Zev, and I do appreciate the family reference. That's nice. I never knew my grandfather, but I'm of course happy to know that he had that position, and I'm very pleased to be able to talk, privileged, I should say, to talk to Celinda Lake and Paul Maslin about public opinion as it stands right now, and as it's liable to look as we get closer and closer to the election. So welcome to you both, and it's great to be with you. I want to ask you a question about public opinion. It's constantly moving. People say that political polling isn't worth much when you're 6 months away from the election. I don't think you buy that. I'm sure not. I don't buy it either. But I do want you to explain, given that people do have that complaint, what is the value of the polling that you're doing now, and what are you looking for on behalf of the various Democrats that you might represent? And so, Linda, let me ask you to go first.
Well, thank you. And it's a real honor to be on here with Paul, one of my favorite colleagues. And Warren, even before I knew your grandfather was Supreme Court Justice, you're one of the people I admire the most. And I love this forum. Well, first of all, I'm glad you asked the question the way you did, because the number that a lot of media pay attention to, and that a lot of candidates will ask you first, is what's the horse race? What's the horse race? Which is the least important question, particularly 6 months out. What we're looking for is a roadmap to victory. We're looking for what are the issues that are on people's minds? What are the perceptions they hold today? Who knows whom? What do they think of them? What messages are particularly strong? What are voting issues, not just issues that people care about? What do they think that you can do something about? Why do they believe things? I mean, one of the things we want to get under is how they're thinking about things, which for me is like one of my favorite things. I love the how people arrive at the conclusions that they're thinking about. And then what we're trying to put together from that is a roadmap to victory and a criteria by, we want to be known by X number of people when. We need to get our favorability up. We need people to know our accomplishments. We need to do better among older people, younger people, women, men. We don't need to worry about these 6 negatives, but we do need to worry about this one. And here's our best answer on it. So we try to figure out what are the dynamics of the race so that we can have some say over what the result will ultimately be.
Very nice. Paul, can you add to that?
Yeah, and I agree with everything Celina said. I would only add by maybe bringing it to the reality of 2024. I think there's somewhat of a misperception that the only thing that matters in politics these days is turning out one's base, that we're so polarized, there's no voters left in the middle, and it's just a simple question of who's going to turn out and who's more enthusiastic or who dislikes the other candidate more. And I think that's not true. There is still a middle. And the middle is to get back to your original point, Warren, it's moving around a lot. And we have other alternatives this year, one in particular than the 2 major candidates. So in terms of the presidential race or any race beyond the presidential race, a lot of what we're trying to do is to figure out and isolate that middle. Those independent voters, predominantly independent voters, a lot of them tend to be somewhat younger. Are they going to vote this year? What are they making the decision on? When to make this decision? I have this sense that a lot of the electorate is going to hold off as long as possible. And then finally, at some critical juncture, they'll start to make a call one way or the other. So that's part of the elements of what makes 2024 so unique. And here we are 5 months away, or 6 months away.
The title of our program is public opinion polling: the good, the bad, and the ugly. So you both work for Democrats. Paul, what's ugly right now?
Well, first off, public polls tend to be more ugly than anything else, but don't get Celina and me started on that one, because we'll get into too much of a technical discussion about why these polls are done and what sampling they use and all the rest of it. Obviously, the primary difficulty for the Democratic Party right now is not a surprise to anybody. We have an incumbent president of the United States whose job approval rating is hovering at about 40% or just below. That does not compare favorably to other incumbents. At this stage of the game, we have an economy that the American people continue to believe is underwater, particularly inflation. And we have an uncertain and chaotic world where it happens to be now happening on his watch as opposed to the other guy 4 years ago. Now, there are, of course, elements involving Donald Trump, involving the 2 parties, involving other key issues that are going to come into play this year that we'll all talk about tonight. But if you want me to limit it, the ugly, the fundamental danger right now, and I would add to that the Electoral College. We have a bunch of national polls that show the race dead even, but as you know, this is not a judgment that ultimately is made by a popular vote, but it comes down to key battleground states, and it is still true, unfortunately, that Biden is trailing in every one of the key battleground states. That's going to have to change between now and November.
So Linda, what's good right now?
What's good is that we're 6 months out. What's good is that we have a very unique situation that we've never had before. I mean, it's good and bad, right? That we have 2 incumbents running, and both of them have some pretty serious negatives. Now, I think Paul and I would agree they have very different records, but this is far from over yet. And the good is what's happening with women voters. If you're a Democrat anyway, women are making a major statement about abortion. And people keep asking me, well, aren't people going to get tired of abortion? And I say, well, when people get tired of sex, then people will get tired of abortion, but not until then. So it's a very salient voting issue, particularly for women, including younger women who might be cross-pressured on other issues. And women have rediscovered, as they've been seeing more and more of Donald Trump, that he has very little respect for women, whether it's Nikki Haley or a judge or a defendant or a woman in a dressing room in New York. And that is, there's starting to be a pretty major gender gap. The good news is, I think the formula for success is to win women by more than we lose men. And I think that's still very possible to do.
Say that again.
The way that Democrats win in close races is we have to win women by more than we lose
By
men.
more than we lose men. Okay, that's, Paul, do you agree? Is there a gender difference then that you
Well,
need to be aware of?
Absolutely, but it also, I think it goes to follow that we'll get into a little bit of the intricacy of strategy now, that as much as Celinda's absolutely right, and there is opportunity, and there has been, and you've seen this in the midterm elections, on the issue of reproductive rights and other issues to really enhance the vote among women. There are also a group of men that are particularly men that are college educated, and also younger men that are definitely in play. And this is not a monolithic situation. Celinda said it right. Win the women by more than we lose the men. Well, part of that is to try to reduce the margin among men. And I want to point to one other factor, which maybe we'll talk a little bit more about, but clearly there's difficulty right now for Biden and Democrats among voters of color. And there's no question that every poll indicates this: a drop in the African-American support, a drop in Hispanic support, even Asian Americans as well. It's having a critical impact on a number of key states. And it is not only, but predominantly male voters that are responsible for that change. So as much as I agree with Celinda that there is an opportunity, and we will need to maximize the vote that we get among women, we've got some difficulties among men, particularly voters of color, that are going to have to be resolved to a large degree in order to win some of these key states.
Linda, where have those male voters of color gone, and why are they not favoring the Democrats as they have in the past?
Well, let's talk a little bit about history first. I mean, in the 2020 presidential campaign, the Republicans were putting a lot of pressure on us with Latino men, particularly over economic issues. And young African American men, they weren't necessarily voting for Trump, but they were talking about sitting it out. So this isn't just an election eve conversion. There have been the seeds of this planted for some time. To win these younger voters, these younger male voters, they have to believe that we're going to be better on the economy for them. And I think that for them is critical. People give Republicans now and businessmen credit on the economy. But when you ask people who would be better on economic well-being for you and your family, then we are very competitive. So I think we have to, and for too long, honestly, I think we talked about GDP. Well, nobody ever said, boy, I hope my GDP goes up tomorrow so that I can afford that vacation in Yellowstone. People are focused on kitchen table economics, and we need to translate. And I think the administration is doing a much better job of it. I also think we'll get more credit in the contrast. I don't think we're going to win men on the positive message. We're going to have to draw a contrast. Better for whom? Generating a job for who? Generating a raise for who? Generating a bonus for who? For whom? That's going to be really important part of the conversation here. And populist economics is very strong with these younger men of color. And I think the administration has been sometimes very comfortable with that message, sometimes less so. But the man from Scranton is here now, and he is very comfortable with the populist message.
Paul, what about the younger voters in general and the response that there has been to what's been going on in with Israel and the countertops on the campuses, and how much of a role is that going to play, do you think, depending on how it goes? Now, apparently President Biden today, you can fill me in on this because I didn't know it until I heard you talk about it. Apparently President Biden has indicated that he's not going to provide the kind of weaponry that he has if in fact Netanyahu decides, as he has promised to go into Rafah.
That's right, and that may be an important turning point. There's sort of a couple of different pieces of that question, Warren, and it's a good one. Part of it is simply a voting group that Democrats, to our credit, have become dependent on, and a lot. And by the way, some of it does overlap with what Celina and I have just been talking about, which is the Latino community and the African American community. A lot of the problem and the difficulty has occurred among younger people in that cohort. So
Yeah.
some of this is not simply a problem of college kids. But there is certainly a question now about turnout. I think younger voters look at each of these two older candidates and just shrug their shoulders and go, who's in this for me? To get to the question Celina raised, a 77-year-old versus an 81-year-old, and it's difficult. Obviously, they have now potentially other options, although Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is no spring chicken by any means. But so there is a variable built in here about whether that vote could, in fact, go off to a third party and protect maybe a holding place for a while before an ultimate decision gets made about the top two candidates. There's an open question now about turnout. We've had the largest turnouts that we've ever seen back to back in presidential years, and even in the midterm years, they've been very high. Can that hold again in 2024? We don't know. As to the specific question, I would still say we're early in the game when it gets to what's happening on campus and what's happening vis-a-vis Gaza, Israel, Hamas, the Palestinians. Clearly, it is, and there are, this is always said, but it is true on these. I have a daughter who's on one of those campuses, that the activity on campus is not simply limited to students. There are other players that are using this and getting involved. But obviously, it does potentially drive a wedge between Joe Biden and an important constituency. He's trying to address it while holding to his basic principles that have carried him to this point. I would simply say, Warren, it is still early in the game here. I don't know that the world's going to look the same in September and October when we are registering those voters, when they're making a decision about turning out, when they're trying to choose between candidates and maybe multiple candidates involved with a third party. That the world may look the same as it does in May. Right now, it is clearly a period of difficulty. There's no doubt about that. But we don't know that May is going to be the same as September or October.
So, Linda, given the age issue, which you mentioned, are the vice presidential candidates going to be more important than they have in the past? And how's Kamala Harris doing? And what do you anticipate? I guess it's very difficult to anticipate what Donald Trump is going to do about anything, but apparently he's not going to choose the woman who owns the ranch and doesn't like dogs. But how important are those candidates going to be? Are they more important than they have been in other elections?
I think so. I mean, first of all, VPs, the most that a VP has ever influenced the race is 1 or 2%. And the most impact they have is when they are initially nominated, traditionally, where they show a certain message, a message for change or an interest in a certain group, or create excitement in the base, or whatever it is, might solidify the doubts that born again Christians have about your lifestyle or things like that. So then the images of vice presidents and presidents merge together. And Vice President Harris's image is still very highly correlated with President Biden's image. She was stronger with younger voters for a while. That's dissipated a little bit because obviously a ticket has one position. Voters do report that they are going to pay extra attention to the qualifications of the VPs because they think there's a very high probability with either one of these candidates that the VP could be president. What's really interesting is, I think obviously I'm very excited about Vice President Harris. I think she's wonderful. I think she's done a great job. I think she's an incredible voice on reproductive health. I think she's great on economic issues and education issues. And I just hope they, keep her out there and expand her portfolio. That Trump is really interesting. I think Kristi Noem probably would have been the person chosen. And of course, besides being someone who owned a ranch and didn't like dogs, She was governor of a state, so she was really pretty qualified.
Yeah.
Although these Republicans, man, with Sarah Palin and Kristi Noem, they have some doozy governors. That's all I can say. But I think he'd be very smart to pick a woman. I think he leans that way. There's some new, at least in this town, there's some talk about Marsha Blackburn coming on the scene now. I think he will not choose a younger male. I think Donald Trump has to be the alpha male in the room.
Mhm.
He is not going to want someone that raises the age question for him or competes with him as an alpha male. So I doubt he will pick some of the younger men that are being discussed. But, you know, as you said, God knows. And probably she doesn't even know who he would pick as VP.
And
Well,
let
does
me
that
throw,
make it, does this whole issue of focusing on Harris, who's been
yeah,
carrying the abortion issue? I'm told that President Biden is still a very devout Catholic and doesn't even like to say the word abortion if he doesn't have to. Although he appears to be stuck with it. But is that going to be an issue then between the vice presidential candidates? Is that likely to
oh,
defer
sure,
to them or
because I mean,
devolve to them?
let's not kid anybody. I mean, no matter who Donald Trump picks, it would shock me if they weren't pretty strongly pro-life and supportive of the Dobbs decision and
Yeah.
any other wacky idea that the various Republicans in these states or federally are going to come up with. You know, I'll throw a little interesting wrench into the mix here. We have two candidates that each say they want to debate. I am skeptical, and certainly skeptical about Trump. What if the only debate that occurs is between the two candidates for vice president? Now that would be
Wow.
very interesting.
Ah, that is interesting. And suggests that it's going to be even more interesting to find out who Trump does decide to
Well,
focus on.
it will put more foot. Clearly, Kamala Harris will rise in whether her popularity gains or not, we don't know, but she's going to rise in importance. I agree
Yeah.
with Celina. The minute that choice is made, all of a sudden there's now a different focus than the one that we've had for, you know, the last, when essentially she's viewed as an ancillary of Joe Biden and not really anything else. And that could definitely change this summer.
Well, what about
Warren, one thing
Kennedy?
I want to, I have a slightly different view of, if you
Yeah.
will indulge me. Yeah, you can be a very devout Catholic and be very pro women being able to make these decisions for themselves. And Joe Biden has been quite articulate, and he's been out on this issue a lot. He said repeatedly, he's made it very clear. We want to reinstate it nationwide. We oppose bans. We oppose some of the, you know, all the crazy ass stuff they talk about. So I think that the president has been quite clear about what he's. I think it makes sense that you have your first woman vice president. I think it makes sense that she goes out and talks about
Yeah.
abortion a lot to women. And I think women are going to be in charge of this decision. And frankly, one of the things we found that's kind of fun in the initiatives is that women tell their husbands how to vote on the initiative. Like, don't you dare come home if you didn't vote yes on that abortion initiative.
I didn't mean to suggest that President Biden was insufficiently concerned about the issue. And if I talked that way, I apologize for it. And thank you for making the point that you did. Paul, what about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and how important is he going to be? He claims that he's now on the ballot in California. I don't know if that's true or not, but a lot of votes in California.
Yeah, he's got this American Independent Party. I think that's his access there. And of course,
Yeah.
he's still struggling in other states. It's going to be a piecemeal thing about, is he on the ballot everywhere or not? When does that happen? How does it happen? The only thing I will say right now is that I think we may be, and I think this is appropriate for 2024. He may be in a unique position where he's not necessarily somebody that's only Ralph Nader getting 3%. I mean, there's one national public poll that had him 3%, which I think was YouGov, but I don't believe that. I mean, we have a host of polls now showing him, depending on when and how you ask the question, anywhere from 8 or 9, 10% to as high as 16%. So there's real support there. Now, but why is the support there? It's primarily there because we have all these voters that don't like either of the two major candidates. And as I said, he may be sort of a holding action where this vote may, you know, the classic third party dynamic is rise, and then start cratering near the end. or never really get to credibility, but get enough votes just at the end that they can become an eyesore. Ross Perot's the case of somebody that rose substantially, then he got out of the race and came back, but he still got 18% of the vote. John Anderson in 1980, who had kind of a quixotic candidacy and ultimately wasn't able to debate President Carter, he still got almost 10% of the vote. So he played a role. And we don't know, by the way, the polls are not absolutely in unison here about who Kennedy is pulling more from. If you noticed, Trump started attacking him in the last week, which makes me think they have at least some polling that suggests that in certain scenarios he could draw more from Trump than from Biden. So I think, Warren, that it's less the people may learn more about RFK Jr., and I suspect when they do, his support will drop, but it's almost less about him. He's just a name, a famous name, and more about the other two. And he's sort of acting in the middle. If I think I'm for Biden, but I don't feel strong about it, and something happens to throw me away from that, well, I can land with Kennedy because I can't vote for Trump. And the same is true vice versa. So he may show up at this 9, 10, 11, 12% might be here for some time. And we're all going to be speculating about what does that mean in terms of these key states.
Well, speaking of key states, what about the so-called battleground states? There's Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And Celina, they are thought to be potentially decisive. Is the campaign going to be won or lost in those 6 states?
Well, it's a little bit like whack-a-mole, right? But I think the blue strategy is the strongest strategy for us, the blue wall. And we don't have to win all of those states, by the way, but we do have to win Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and the electoral vote in Nebraska. And I think that is the most likely win scenario. After that, I think Georgia's really tough. The numbers are not looking good there. We don't have Stacey Abrams on the ballot. I think that's or Warnock. I mean, I think that's going to be really tough. Trump, of course, has said that he will put Minnesota and Virginia in play and that he's ahead in both. He's not ahead in both, but he could put them into play. And that's where a third party could make a difference as well. And then some people talk about Florida. I personally, Paul, I'd be really interested in what you think. I'm not, I mean, saying you're going to win Florida is like saying you're going to win Western Europe. It's not a minor play. It's a huge budget. It's 7 media markets. All of them cost a fortune. We don't have the infrastructure in there that we need. And even though we have a couple of initiatives on the ballot, I think it's really tough. And I think governors make a difference. The good news about the blue wall, they all have Democratic governors. They have very popular, good Democratic governors. Florida, of course, has a very active Republican governor whom we might find inconceivable that he's well liked, but he's well liked in his state.
Well, what do you think about Florida?
If we have a chance to win Florida, we don't have to worry about the other 6. So I'm with Celina. I think it's a pipe dream. What I would add to Celina's point is that 269, 260. If the Nebraska legislature and the governor are still talking about possibly, it's tricky for them to do it in time, but possibly getting rid and going back to the winner take all. Which means that district in Omaha can't give us the one vote that would make the difference. Remember what Celina just described: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all of which, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all of which are very close in the polls right now, all of which were very close in terms of their outcome in Michigan had a little bit more margin for Biden in 2020, but both Pennsylvania and Wisconsin have been very close 2 elections in a row. If we win all 3 and the one district in Omaha, it's 270 to 268. I still shudder to think, after everything we've been through, including January 6th, of what really would happen in this country if we have an electoral vote total of 270 to 268. God forbid we're 269 to 269. But I don't even want to go, Warren. Others can speculate about what might happen and what might transpire in the body politic. I would like, as a Democrat, I would like us to have some cushion. And I agree with Celina, and it gets back to the point we made about the decline of support among African Americans and Hispanics. It hurts us badly in Georgia, in Arizona, and in Nevada. I think of the 3, I'm just going to throw out, you can prove me wrong in November. Of those 3, I do think that Nevada is still the one that could produce a Democratic victory and give us a little bit. If we do win Wisconsin, we have to still win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. You can't lose any of those three, and give us a little bit of cushion here. There is a tremendous, active, strong record going back to the late Harry Reid, of Democratic organization in Nevada. We know how to win in Nevada. There's some difficulties in Las Vegas. There always are in Clark County and in and around Las Vegas on certain issues, but I think it's not irrevocable. The support among Latinos, if it is able, Biden's able to start winning it back on economic terms, can help him. So maybe Nevada ends up being the one that peaks out from the rest and gives Biden a little bit more of a break. But it's very tight right now.
So Linda, some of these states are among those that have senators running, incumbent senators or just senatorial candidates. How is that going to impact things one way or the other in those states?
Well, it helps, I think. And there's synergy between the two of them. And when Paul is talking about Nevada, we have Jackie Rosen there, who's actually doing quite well.
Yep.
I mean, in a tough state. But better than the president's doing in the state right now. And you have Ruben Gallego, and I think it was in Arizona, very good that Kristen Sinema got out. So
Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin.
Yeah, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, who has an incredible self-funder, but is very popular in her state. You have the open Senate race in Michigan. So I think Casey's race in Pennsylvania, I think that Casey has done the best job, and I'm not his pollster. I think he's done the best job I've seen out there of developing this dialogue about greedflation and shrinkflation. He's really speaking to the price gouging and the populist economics. So you have some echo chamber for your message. You have some help getting voters out. And I think that these Senate races can be quite helpful. So I think having a Democratic governor helps, and having a viable or strong Democratic Senate race is very helpful.
I was on a call in a state that I can't name, but I literally said in this call, who's dragging who? Because normally it's always the top of the ticket that drags along everybody else or spooks everybody else because it's weak. But I think what Celina said is absolutely right. I think there actually can be benefit to Joe Biden in some of these key states because and by the way, the choice for why are Democrats winning in the choice for Senate? Because when you move away from the simple personalities of Trump and Biden and get to what is, I think, a more clean issue contrast, Democrats start to rise. They start to have advantages that aren't necessarily present, at least not yet, at the presidential level. So I think there's some reason for optimism in what the impact of what these Senate races could have on these key states.
I want to give our viewers a chance. Just go ahead.
Warren, I want to encourage your viewers to watch the initiatives in these states as well. I mean, there are abortion initiatives in a number of states, including Arizona. There are one fair wage initiatives, increasing minimum wage in Michigan, in Arizona, and in Ohio, which I think helps Sherrod. That's not a presidential state, obviously. So watch these initiatives too. They're going to bring out some voters. They're going to set some contrasts. I mean, one of the things that's really great about having an initiative on the ballot, particularly an abortion initiative, is there's no fussing and fuming now about where you are. The voters know where they are on these initiatives, and they just want a simple answer from their candidate. So you're going to vote yes or no. And candidates used to be able to duck issues. It's hard to duck with voters anymore. They're not having it. It's like, I asked you a simple question. I have to make this decision myself. I want to know, are you yes or no on this initiative?
I want to give our viewers an opportunity to ask questions, and they are doing so by sending messages on chat. But before we do that, I just have to ask you about the enormous amount of attention that's being paid to what is referred to as the Stormy Daniels trial, even though Stormy Daniels may not have a whole lot to do with it. But there's several questions. What if Trump wins? What if Trump loses? What if he goes to jail? All of those things are, it seems to me, at this point, each one is as likely as the other. What difference is it going to make, Paul?
Well, we're into the unknown. It's sort of also true about Donald Trump. I have noticed in the last week or 10 days some uptick for Biden. And I wonder if all of the exposure that Trump is getting in that courtroom isn't, in fact, no matter what, I tend to be one who said earlier this year, the voters have had full information about the fact that Trump's been indicted, that there are 4 different cases, multiple, all that stuff is out there, and yet he's still ahead in the polls. That ought to give us a little bit of pause about thinking that somehow there's a magic bullet out there about Trump's legal situation. But we really don't know what might happen depending on this verdict. I personally would be shocked if he ever ends up going into a jail cell, but a guilty verdict, a felony, is not a minor thing. And we're now into the great unknown where, like so many things with Donald Trump, this has never quite happened before. And we don't quite know how it plays out. We know what he and his allies will try to say, but we don't really know, particularly with that middle that is gravitating between, I really am not happy with either of these two choices. Does that become a more definitive decision that helps make up their mind? So, I just think we can speculate. It does not appear, as of this moment, given the latest ruling, that we're going to have any other cases that ever get close to a trial or get close to a verdict. So this may be the only one. And it's obviously on a subject matter that, everybody would rather not be discussing, but it's out there. And Celina made a point very early on about this man's treatment of women, and whatever you think of Stormy Daniels, that part of Donald Trump is open for all to look at. And it didn't stop him winning in 2016, as we know. But I think it still could be a significant factor this time.
So, Linda, what about Trump's behavior in the trial and the constant claims that he makes that he is a victim of institutions that he seems to be running against, particularly the judiciary? He likes to say that he's a tough guy. He wants to round up illegal immigrants and use the military to illegal immigrants and use the military to do that, put them in camps. He's talked about extraordinary policies in that regard. And yet he also has this role of victimization. Do people perceive that there's a sort of a conflict there, almost a contradiction between the way he's presenting himself one time as opposed to another?
Well, his base does not. A lot of this reinforces his base. And they agree with this analysis. I mean, you've got 76% of Republicans who believe he is the true winner of the election. I don't know what you're doing in your polling, Paul, but we're using that now as a basic variable about who can be pried off of him and who can't. Because if you think he really won the election, then, it's hopeless. Voters in general, this is an instant oatmeal culture, and voters in general don't understand why this trial's taken so long. If it wasn't politically motivated, they don't think it's great. It's in New York. Unfortunately, it's getting characterized as the hush money trial. And people think, of course you pay off your mistress. I don't like it, but anybody in their right mind would do that before they ran for president. But this is an election interference case. And I think we got to get back to that central coverage. I agree with Paul. I think that his attitude and he's going after the daughter of judges and just his, being derisive about comments. That's just not popular. Voters don't like that. And it reminds them of how divisive he is, how disrespectful he is, how he's not a role model for their kids. And I think it wears on them. This isn't the strongest case to get him beat. However, if he is convicted of a felony, I think that's pretty serious, particularly for those Republicans who don't think he was the legitimate winner of the election to begin with. What I'm concerned about is that a lot of different things, Donald Trump loses the battle but wins the war. A lot of the controversies here come down to him being a strong man and by implication Biden being weak. And that's not a good formula for us. That is not a winning formula for this presidential. And so we have to work to make this a character comparison for sure. But who do you trust? Who's going to be respectful of ordinary people? Who's going to be in touch with their concerns? That's the kind of contrast. Who's in it for himself? Who's going to be on the retribution tour day one? Those are the kinds of things that I think we have to get this contrast around. As long as it's strength and weakness, that's not a good formula for us.
I moderated, I agree with Celina. I moderated or viewed a couple of focus groups recently. Both of the examples are comments from women, and I think they sort of put the finger on what each of the difficulties are for each side here. One woman said, okay, I know he's a crook, but I'm going to get some money. You know, that was her conclusion, because everybody, the anti-Trump people were getting into a boil about, you know, all these things he's done, but I'll get some money. The other one, a younger woman, said, well, it might be better to have inaction than action. And what she meant was Trump's action is chaos and destructive and could threaten me. And yeah, maybe Biden, and I'm not saying this is true about Biden. He's done an awful lot of things that he's not getting credit for. But in her perception, Biden's this doddering old man that's isn't doing a whole lot. And I sure don't really have a whole lot of confidence. But maybe I'd rather have that than insanity. And I think somewhere in there, both sides, of course, are going to try to communicate their strongest issues and get their records out and try to do that contrast. But in those two comments may be a lot of the truth about ultimately how people are going to try to decide this thing.
Let me go to Alice. She wants to know about the concerns that election officials are being intimidated, and the intimidation techniques appear to be preventing competent people from even continuing their jobs. How do we protect the integrity of the voting system, Celinda?
I'm not an expert on the structural ways to do that, but Alice, your question is really a good one, and it's a very serious concern. And the voters hate it. They really, really admire election workers, and they don't like them harassed, and they don't like them interfered with. They're very concerned about it, and so it's a big concern. And you're right, we're going to be short of election workers because people won't put up with this kind of harassment. And even if they would put up with it for themselves, they don't want their families harassed. And they're doing crazy things like releasing the addresses of election workers and stuff, which ought to be, I mean, I just think that's unimaginable that you would do that. So it's a real serious issue, and it's part and parcel of a whole set of serious issues that our democracy is being threatened by this. It's being threatened by AI. It's being threatened in a lot of ways. And the voters are extremely concerned about it.
It's the saddest part to me of these last 10 years, and certainly since 2016. And I wish that I could say I was confident, but in the scenario that we described earlier, where the Electoral College comes down to one vote, where you might have, you know, 3 or 4 states that are decided, you know, look what happened in 2020, but 3 or 4 states that are decided by a very narrow margin of votes with social media and all the pressures that take place. I fear, frankly, for our democracy in that scenario, and fear that no matter the outcome, obviously there's one that Celina and I prefer over the other, but no matter the outcome, there's going to be millions of Americans who are going to feel utterly upset, frustrated, angry, disenfranchised, whatever you want to call it, by that outcome. And I fear for the aftermath. And if people do not believe the election is fair and square, then all of a sudden our democracy is laid open for all kinds of very bad outcomes.
Pardon me. Let me go to one of the other questions here. This is an interesting one. How vital will Barack Obama be to the election? I beg your pardon. Celina, why don't you take that while I get a drink?
Okay, and thank you. I think Barack Obama and Michelle Obama can both play major roles. They are very appealing to young people still, and I think in the end they can be a major arbiter there. Michelle Obama, we tested Get Out the Vote statements in 2020. Her statements were literally the most persuasive to everybody about getting out to vote, because she doesn't usually play a role. And people really, really like her and remember her. So I think the Obamas can both play a major role, uniting the Democrats, energizing Democrats, getting people out to vote. I think they're important for sure.
Yeah, and if I can get into a little bit of Barack mode, Joe's got to get close to the finish line here. Nobody can do it for him. But if he does, Barack and Michelle are strong enough to get him over that final line. I couldn't agree with Celina more.
Jonathan wants to know, what are your fears about a Muslim holdout in Michigan? Paul, why don't you take that one?
Well, it's a fear. There is a substantial, largely Palestinian Arab community in Michigan. There is certainly some evidence that Biden's standing has dropped significantly with that group that has generally been a pro-democratic group. It's a little over 1% of the electorate. I don't want to diminish it. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, of course, or to say that it's locked in, that vote will absolutely end up being strongly for Donald Trump. But there's clearly been some switch in Michigan. But it's not the only reason that Biden's been trailing in Michigan. And a couple of the recent polls have showed a much closer race in Michigan. Remember, since they're the same candidates running, you kind of do have to go back to 4 years ago and say, okay, what did that state do 4 years ago? How many people will have changed their mind? How could that state have changed? And the vast majority of states behave close to what they did 4 years before. Some of them don't, but the vast majority stick. And we have a little bit of a cushion. I think the Biden margin in Michigan was closer to nearly 3 points as opposed to very narrow in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Now, Michigan, of course, shockingly, was a narrow defeat in 2016, and we don't need to belabor why that happened. So the short answer, Warren, is it hurts Biden some. I don't know that it's dispositive, that it's going to decide the state. There are lots of other pieces of the Michigan electorate, and Michigan generally is a better state for Democrats than either Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. So make of it what you will. Michigan's going to be close.
Here's Jocelyn. Celinda, she wants to know, what percentage of Nikki Haley voters do you think might go for Biden?
It's a really good question. I mean, a number in some states, a number of Nikki Haley voters were actually independent and Democrats, not primary Democrats, but Democrats who did not have a lot of turnout history. The Nikki Haley voters do not think that Donald Trump won the election. And the Nikki Haley voters are very, very interested in the convictions. They think if you're convicted of a felony by a jury of ordinary people, then that's a very serious problem. So I think there are some Nikki Haley voters, but in some ways we may have been double counting, because the ones that we can get are not hardcore primary Republican voters, but people who came into that primary, many of whom had voted for us in the general. You've also got a lot of Nikki Haley voters who are double haters, and we haven't talked about that group. 17% of the voters are double haters right now. They dislike both candidates. In 2020, there were only 3% of the voters who were double haters. People did not hate Joe Biden then. And right now, 50% of the double haters vote RFK or undecided. So a lot of the Nikki Haley voters may be coming in, but not for Joe Biden. They might be coming in for third party. So it's a complicated formula. I don't think the Nikki Haley voters, unless we get a felony conviction, the Nikki Haley voters are probably not going to be key to the success. But it's part of the turmoil that goes on. And my own goal is to get us a woman president. And I believe that our solution to that is to nominate one in 2028 from each party, and then we'll have to get a woman president. So I hope you guys will all join me in that.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, Paul, here's Steve. He says, I want you to elaborate on what you've talked about already. Can you speak to the benches of the Democrats and Republicans? Are the Democratic governors heir apparents? He's talking about Shapiro, Westmore, Whitmer. Are they stronger than their Republican counterparts?
I think the answer is yes. And in some of those states, they can be very important. You just named a couple of them for sure. In terms of, and again, we all overstate all of these factors, but when you have an election that could be decided, we've learned, having elections that get decided by 10, 15, 20,000 votes, there are a whole lot of factors that can end up having that impact. I will say this, as of this moment, it is undeniably true that in the battleground states, Joe Biden is better organized, is raising more money. Democratic Party, Celinda is working for the DNC. We are in better, we're never in great shape. We could use all the money we can get, but we are in better shape than they are. That is not inconsequential. Again, in an election that that could be decided by these narrow margins, I think having that bench is a good thing. It's interesting. The Republican Party image is still very poor. They are the ones that are running the House of Representatives, and we see the constant turmoil we saw just in the last day that exists there. So I think when people if they're able, most voters probably aren't able, but if they are able to step back from simply this is Biden, Trump, but are there other elements here? I think Democrats start to have a little bit of an advantage over the Republicans.
So Linda, here's a question from Jack. How can Biden's campaign counter the disinformation and attempts at social unrest that China and Russia are promulgating on social media?
Wow.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, man, if I had the answer to that, I wouldn't be on this Zoom. It's very serious, though. It's a very good question. And the amount of disinformation that is penetrating some of these target audiences. We've been doing some focus groups in Nevada too, Paul. And I've never seen disinformation in the Latino community the way we saw it in Nevada in those last groups. It was stunning. And when we were trying to push back and we'd say, somebody would say something, I saw this online, blah, 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 blah. And then we would try to push back and people would say, no, I saw it too. I saw it too. Yeah. So it's very frightening, and people are terrible at discerning disinformation. I mean, I've had cases where my staff have come and said, you forwarded something that wasn't true. And it's like, no, I did not know that. I'm a pollster. I'm not in the business of promoting false information. Thank you for sharing that. I got to get that down right away. I had no idea. So it's really serious. It's really serious. And boy, Paul, I don't know if you have a solution. I sure don't.
I have no solution. It's like we're the fools here to think this is a fair fight being played by traditional and old-fashioned rules. When I just said, well, isn't it great that might have more money and be better organized? And then Warren, that question just went to the fact that there are bots out there that are clearly being operated by two of our principal, if not our principal adversaries in the world, who may very well, for different reasons, not want Joe Biden to win this election, and there isn't a whole lot we can do about it. But to pretend that it is not out there and impacting the electorates, Linda just gave you the absolute example of what can happen. And so it's very, very difficult.
Some Republicans have actually been accused of promulgating the Russian line.
Oh, they never do that. Yeah. Warren, come on. What are we talking about? There's gambling in this casino? Really?
Paul, I'm going to steal that line. That's awesome.
So what about the Senate and the House?
We don't know the half. We don't know the half of it. I hope I'm alive long enough to read all the books when they finally come out and we learn much more of the truth. We don't know the half of it of what's happened in these last 7 or 8 years.
We've talked a bit about the House, the Senate. We haven't talked at all about the House. The Speaker today was rescued apparently by the Democrats, and perhaps things will be more orderly as a result of that. Perhaps not. I don't know. Paul, it looks like you have some ideas about that.
Well, the weird thing about this election is we don't need to clinically go into the Senate and talk about Larry Hogan, unfortunately, but our odds are difficult in the Senate. We have to win everywhere, and including Maryland, because we're not going to win West Virginia. But the House may be the big surprise of this election. I am absolutely convinced that there are not, we're down to a very small margin, and we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 seats that are up for grabs. And Democrats are running strong races with good candidates in places that we have an ability to, a lot of them are suburban, that we have an ability to win votes. And it would not be shocking, no matter what else happens in this election, would not be shocking at all if the Democrats win back the House. So I don't know, Linda, if you agree with me.
Oh, I totally agree. And the only 2 pieces of information I would add is all those swing districts, I think with the exception of maybe one, we won with Biden. Now, I'm not completely convinced Biden would win them today, but we won them. I mean, okay. The second thing I would say is they are all pro-choice. Every single one of those swing districts is solidly pro-choice. So we're going to win back the House. I really think that, or we should all buy property in Canada if they would have us.
Let Mark Johnson have a little bit of success here and he survives, but the fact that they get to this point, that they have a Marjorie Taylor Greene, I mean, it just underscores the craziness of trusting this party with the entire levers of our government.
Anne wants
And
to
voters
know.
don't like that, by the way. Voters like divided government.
Yep.
The other thing I want to say for your members, just because they are politically active and so involved, please, when you're thinking about Senate races, do not forget Montana and Ohio. They are essential. They have two of our best candidates that we've ever had in America. They are running spectacular races, but they're going to be tough races, and we need to do everything we can to help Chester and Sherrod.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. That was one of the questions from one of our viewers. So Anne wants to know, speaking of women, Celinda, what is Liz Cheney doing to keep Trump from being reelected?
Well, she's come out against Trump. She said that she will keep January 6th alive.
Yeah.
She has started a PAC, a threat to democracy PAC. I think she's doing quite a lot, actually. And I'm like many of you probably on this call. I don't agree with Liz Cheney on a single issue. I love that woman. She is a statement of courage. But I think she's not, and it's good. She didn't have to convince me and you on this call. She's in different channels that we're in, but as I understand it, and I know her pollster very well and the pollster for her threat to democracy effort, I think she's doing quite a bit, actually.
Another question, we've covered it, but not bad to go back to it again. What about the polls being influenced relative to what happens in the Israeli-Hamas war? Paul, let me go back to you on that one. And very important, it seems to me, that President Biden took the action that he did today.
Yeah, I agree, but I think if I could take it to a different level, one of the difficulties of both that war and then obviously the war in Ukraine is that there is a certain body politic in America of thought that says, why are we putting all this money overseas? What about home when we've got inflation where it is, and why aren't we dealing more with those priorities? And unfortunately, and I don't want to get into the details here of Donald Trump and Ukraine, which is a whole nother discussion. But in this context, unfortunately, Joe Biden, it's happening on his watch, and we have a clear stance that actually most people agree with on Ukraine, but unfortunately the war continues with no certain ending to it. And now you have this very divisive, very difficult situation involving Gaza and Israel and Hamas, the Palestinians, that's just a mess. And I'm very sympathetic to the president here. He's got a very difficult set of actors to deal with and a stream to navigate. I don't know how big either of them will be. That neither of them show up as anywhere near inflation, abortion, immigration, healthcare. Some of the issues, healthcare, by the way, that's an issue we haven't talked about at all tonight, and it could absolutely be a real potential plus for Democrats. The Republicans still want to get rid of the ACA, which the American people do not. The Republicans still are siding with the insurance companies way too often. So don't lose sight of the healthcare issue also as having some importance here. But Israel, Palestine, Gaza is a mess, and no other way to put it.
One thing about healthcare, I want to underscore what Paul said. Very, very, very powerful issue, sleeper issue. Prescription drugs is our strongest response to inflation. And by the way, in the African American community, we should be saying always, he wants to do away with Obamacare. And African Americans are, even those young alienated men, are completely convinced that Donald Trump wants to erase every history of Barack Obama. Yep. So it's very powerful in that community to say he wants to do away with Obamacare and everything else we accomplished during those 8 years.
Okay, well, I think that we're in pretty good shape here as we approach the 2-minute time. And
Good morning.
Always like to ask at the end of the show, are there positive things that you can cite that will leave people with a good feeling as they leave the program? So, Paul, let me go to you first on that.
I'll give you one, and I'm going to talk about the next generation because I've got 3 of them, 2 of which are closer to probably the voters that are being seen and really matter. I still think that for all of we know the cynicism that's out there and misinformation, and we can speculate what will happen, I still think younger Americans, they are our future. They've been dealt a very difficult hand. Go back to COVID and the experiences they had. And yet I still think there are a group of people that care, that will participate in this election, that will ultimately try to sort their way through it. And I am reasonably confident in whatever judgment they make, even if it's not the one that I want. So they still, to me, are a real plus in this whole procedure.
So Linda, got a
This
positive
is,
note?
yeah, this isn't what I was originally going to say, but Paul has already inspired me because I agree with him. Support young candidates. These young candidates are absolutely amazing. We pull for some of the youngest, Maxwell Frost, AOC, Greg Kassar. These people are unbelievable leaders. And we got to get more of them in office, and we got to get more of them visibility. So I think, Paul, you made a great statement. You inspired me. And the other positive thing I would say is, we always say, this is the most important election we've ever had. This is the most important election we've ever had. Well, this is the most important election we've ever had. And everything you do matters.
Linda Lake, Paul Maslin, you've inspired each other. I hope you've inspired the audience as well. You've inspired me. Thanks a lot. Great to have you. And I hope you'll come back again. Look forward to that one.
Thank you, Warren.
Paul, really enjoyed doing
Yeah,
this with
same,
you. Thank
Celina.
you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just want to say that next Wednesday, May 15th, the former Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano is going to be with Pat Morrison. How safe are we? A frank assessment of the condition of our homeland security. Thanks a lot to everybody for watching, for asking questions, for being alert and attentive. Have a wonderful night and stay safe.